Hello everyone. Today, I want to share an incredible story about how English helped me achieve my dreams, follow my passion, and find success. If you have big dreams, whether to become a doctor, engineer, lawyer, businessman, or anything great, then English is 100% necessary. There is no doubt about it. English is spoken by 1.5 billion people worldwide and is the language of travel, business, and the internet. Without English, you might miss out on big opportunities, such as getting a better job, making international friends, or enjoying movies and books in their original language. But don't worry, you can start learning today and become part of this global community. If I could learn English and achieve my dream, so can you. My name is Sofia, and I am from Brazil. I was born in a small town into a middle-class family. Not rich, not poor, but with just enough to live comfortably. My parents worked very hard every day. My father was a taxi driver, and my mother was a school teacher. They always told me education is the key to success. Since I was a little girl, I had only one dream: to become a doctor. I still remember the moment that changed my life. I was 10 years old when my little brother fell seriously ill with a high fever. My parents were scared and crying, unsure of what to do. Then, a doctor walked in, calm, confident, and full of kindness. He smiled at us and said, "Don't worry, I will take care of your son." I watched him work, checking my brother, giving him medicine, and speaking with such knowledge. A few hours later, my brother's fever was gone. He was safe. At that moment, I knew one day I would become a doctor and save lives. But as I grew up, I realized something terrible. If you want to become a doctor, you need English. All medical books, research papers, and even hospital communication require English. However, my English was terrible. I attended a public school where they taught very little English. I knew basic words like hello and how are you. But when I saw full English sentence, I felt lost. I remember one day in school when my English teacher asked, "Sophia, can you read this sentence?" I looked at the book, but the words seemed to dance in front of my eyes. I could not read. I could not understand. And from here, you can continue with the rest of the story. Smiling face with smiling guys. I did not understand. I wanted to cry. "I don't know. Miss," I whispered. The class laughed. That day, I went home and sat alone in my room, thinking, how will I become a doctor if I can't even read a simple sentence in English? I felt hopeless. But then, something happened that changed everything. One evening, my father came home, tired from work. He sat next to me and asked, "Sophia, what's wrong? You've been so sad these days." I looked at him and said, "Papa, I want to become a doctor, but my English is bad. Without English, I cannot study medicine." My father was silent for a long time. Then he said something that changed my life. "If English is stopping you, then learn English. Go to a place where everyone speaks English." I was shocked. "But Papa, we don't have money for that," I said. He smiled and replied, "We don't have much, but we have enough. Your dreams are important." That night, my parents and I sat together and discussed the best place for me to learn English. Why did we choose Canada? 1. Everyone speaks English. I would have no choice but to speak English every day. 2. Great education system. Canada has some of the best schools for learning English. 3. Multicultural and friendly people. Canadians are warm and kind to international students. 4. More affordable. Studying the USA or the UK was too expensive, but Canada was possible. It was not an easy decision. We were a middle-class family with limited savings. My parents made a huge sacrifice, using almost everything they had to pay for my flight, my English school, and my first few months of living in Canada. Before I left, my mother held my hand and said, "Sophia, we are giving you everything we have. Promise me you will not give up." Tears filled my eyes. I hugged her tightly and said, "I promise, Mama." Then, with one suitcase, a little money, and a big dream, I flew to Canada. My first day in Canada. The moment I landed in Toronto, I felt like an alien. The weather was freezing. In Brazil, it was always warm, but here, my hands felt like ice. The food was strange. I missed my mother's homemade Brazilian rice and beans. The people were kind, but they spoke so fast. And then came the biggest problem, English. At the airport, a man asked me, "Hey, do you need a taxi?" I panicked. I did not understand. I just smiled nervously and said, "Yes." He asked, "Where to?" I had no idea what he was saying. My brain stopped working. Finally, I just showed him the address on my phone. And from here, you can continue the story. Smiling face with smiling guys. That night, in my small rented room, I cried. What am I doing here? I can't understand anything. How will I survive? For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. The next day, I went to my English language school. The teacher smiled warmly and said, "Welcome, everyone. Let's introduce ourselves." When my turn came, I stood up. My hands were shaking. "My name's Sophia. I'm from Brazil," I said. I wanted to say more, but my mind went blank. My words were stuck in my throat. The teacher smiled encouragingly, but I noticed some students laughing. I sat down, feeling humiliated. That night, I made a decision. No matter how hard it is, no matter how many mistakes I make, I will learn English. I made a plan. I promised myself that I would do everything possible to become fluent. And that was the beginning of my English learning journey. My first weeks in Canada. I still remember my first few weeks in Canada. It felt like stepping into a new world. It was exciting but also terrifying. Everything was different. In my country, I understood everything. Here, I felt like a baby learning to speak for the first time. Before I tell you how I improved my English, let me share some of the strangest things I noticed in Canada. Times no school uniforms. In Brazil, students wore uniforms. But in Canada, children wore whatever they wanted. Some even wore pajamas to school, and nobody cared. Times people don't touch much. In my country, we hug, kiss on the cheek, and stand close when talking. But in Canada, people value personal space. If you hug someone without asking, they might feel uncomfortable. Times the weather changes in seconds. 1 minute, it's sunny. The next, it's raining or even snowing. Times self-checkout in stores. In many supermarkets, there was no cashier. People scanned and paid for their groceries by themselves. Times people say sorry for everything. Even if you step on their foot, they say sorry. I found that so funny. Times food portions are huge. I once ordered a small meal at a restaurant, and it looked like food for 3 people. Times the biggest shock? The English. People spoke so fast and used slang I had never heard before. In school, I had learned proper English. But in real life, people said things like, "Oh, want to grab a coffee?" Instead of, "Would you like to get a coffee?" "Oh, I'm down for that." Meaning I agree. "Oh, that's so lit." Meaning that's amazing. I felt like I had never studied English in my life. The second day in my English class, I was determined to do better. The teacher gave us a simple writing task. I was excited. I can do this, I thought. But when she returned my paper, it was full of red marks. She smiled kindly and said, "Sophia, your writing is good, but your sentence structure needs work. You think in Portuguese and translate to English. That's why it sounds. And you can continue from here." Smiling face with smiling guys. Feeling frustrated, I realized that speaking English was even worse than writing. The teacher would ask me a question, and although I knew the answer in my head, nothing came out when I opened my mouth. Will I ever speak English fluently? I felt like crying, but I refused to stay weak in English. I knew that if I didn't improve, my dream of becoming a doctor would die. So, I made a plan. The headphone trick, talking to myself in public. One of my biggest problems was speaking. I was too shy and afraid of making mistakes. So, I found a solution. I put on headphones and walked around the city, pretending I was on a phone call. But in reality, I was talking to myself in English. I described everything around me. I am walking on the street. The sky is blue. That woman is wearing a red coat. Now I am entering a cafe. I will order a coffee. This trick helped me think in English and practice without fear. The 3 new words rule. Every day, I learned 3 new words and made sure to use them in a sentence. It was a simple rule, but it made a huge difference in improving my vocabulary. No more subtitles. At first, I watched movies in English with subtitles. But then I realized something. I was reading, not listening. So, I turned off the subtitles and forced myself to understand. It was difficult at first, but over time, I started catching common words and phrases. Then came the day I decided to challenge myself. I walked into a coffee shop and told myself, "Today, I will talk to someone in English, no matter what." I walked up to the counter. The barista smiled and said, "Hey, what can I get you today?" My heart was beating fast. "Don't panic, Sophia. You can do this." I took a deep breath and said, "I would like a cappuccino, please." She smiled and asked, "Do you want it with almond milk or regular milk?" I understood her. I quickly replied, "Regular milk, please." She handed me my coffee and said, "Here you go. Have a great day." And I replied, "You too." It was a small conversation, but I felt like I had won a gold medal. That day, I realized something important. English is not about being perfect. It's about being confident. Surviving in Canada. Learning English was one challenge, but surviving in Canada was another. Canada is expensive, and I had to manage my budget carefully. Here's what I spent each month. Times rent for a small room, $800. I lived with a roommate to save money. Times groceries, $250. I learned to cook at home instead of eating out. Times transportation, $120. I bought a monthly bus pass in Toronto. Times phone bill, $50. Times English classes, $500 per month. To afford these expenses, I worked part-time at a small cafe while studying. My schedule was tough. I woke up at 6 a.m., went to school, worked at the cafe, came home exhausted, and still studied English at night. I missed home. I missed my family. But I knew that every struggle was bringing me closer to my dream. I refused to give up. I missed my family and home. But every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself of my parents' sacrifice. I could not fail. They had given everything for me to be here, and I had to make it worth it. The biggest turning point came when I stopped translating in my head. In the beginning, my brain always followed the same exhausting process. Times I would hear a sentence in English. Times I would translate it into Portuguese in my head. Times I would think of a response in Portuguese. Times I would translate it back into English before speaking. This took forever, and conversations felt frustrating. But after 4 months of daily English exposure, something amazing happened. One day, I was in a grocery store. The cashier casually asked, "Do you need a bag?" And without thinking, I instantly replied, "No, I have one. Thanks." For the first time, my brain didn't translate. I was thinking in English. That moment felt like magic. I knew I was finally getting fluent. My advice for anyone struggling with English: if you are struggling with English, here's what helped me the most. 1. Speak every day, even if you're alone. Use the headphone trick like I did. 2. Stop translating in your head. Start thinking in English. 3. Talk to native speakers, even if it's scary. 4. Surround yourself with English. Change your phone, movies, and music to English. 5. Don't be afraid of mistakes. Mistakes help you grow. 6. Most importantly, never give up. I still remember the day when everything truly changed for me. The moment I realized, wow, I can actually speak English. Facing my biggest fear. By the time I had been in Canada for 6 months, my English had improved significantly. I could understand people better, order food confidently, and even have small conversations with my classmates. But I still had one big problem. I was terrified of talking to native speakers. They spoke too fast, used too much slang, and I always felt stupid when I didn't understand something. So, I avoided conversations. If someone spoke to me, I would just smile, say yes or haha, yeah, even if I had no idea what they actually said. But deep down, I knew that if I wanted to be truly fluent, I had to face this fear. So, I made a crazy decision. My first real conversation. One morning, I walked into my favorite coffee shop and told myself, "Sophia, today you are going to have a real conversation with a native speaker. No running away." I stood in line, nervous, repeating positive thoughts in my head. Then, suddenly, a girl next to me smiled and said, "Ah, this line is so long, right?" I froze. This was it. My moment. I took a deep breath and forced myself to reply, "Yeah, it's really long." She smiled and continued, "I come here every morning, and it's always like this." My brain started panicking. What do I say next? But instead of overthinking, I just went with it and said, "Oh, really? I just moved here, so I don't know." She smiled even more and asked, "Oh, cool. Where are you from?" And just like that, we had a conversation. For the first time, I wasn't translating in my head. I wasn't scared. I just talked. After that day, something clicked in my brain. I realized I can actually do this. That moment gave me the confidence I had been missing all along. And confidence was the key. Now that I felt more comfortable speaking English, I wanted to take things to the next level. I didn't just want to speak English. I wanted to sound like a native speaker. So, I started doing something crazy. The shadowing method. Whenever I watched a TV show, I would pause, repeat the sentence exactly like the actor, and try to match their accent. For example, if I heard, "Oh my god, that's insane," I would pause and mimic it exactly. "Oh my god, that's insane." I copied the tone, speed, and emotion. I did this for hours every day. At first, it felt weird, but after a month, my pronunciation improved drastically. I also started keeping a notebook of my mistakes. Every time I made an error, I wrote it down and corrected it. For example, cross mark I am agree with you. Heavy check mark I agree with you. By reviewing my mistakes every day, I stopped repeating them. But there was one more thing I had to do, the hardest step for me. I forced myself to make Canadian friends. I knew that was the fastest way to improve. Here's what I did. 1. I joined local events. I went to free meetups for international students. 2. I used conversation exchange apps. I found Canadians who wanted to learn my language, so we did a language exchange. 3. I talked to my coworkers. I stopped being shy and started chatting with them more. And guess what? The more I talked to real Canadians, the more natural my English became. Even though my English was improving, life was still hard. I was always tired. Studying English, working part-time, and cooking my own food was exhausting. I missed my family. I couldn't visit home because flights were too expensive. I struggled with money. Even after 6 months, I felt broke all the time. One day, I checked my bank account and saw that I had only $5 left. I sat in my tiny room and cried. Why is this so hard? Am I making a mistake? Should I just go back home? But then I remembered why I was here. I didn't come all this way just to give up. So, I wiped my tears and said, "No, I will make this work." And I did. Fast forward to today. I want you to imagine something. Imagine waking up every morning in a beautiful apartment, looking at the city skyline, drinking coffee, and thinking, I made it. I did it. I became the person I always dreamed of. That's my life now. But 5 years ago, I was a broke student struggling with English, feeling lost in a foreign country. To get into medical school, I had to pass the IELTS exam. And let me tell you, it was terrifying. The reading section was full of long, confusing passages. The speaking section made me feel like I was being judged. The writing section was a nightmare. I studied every single day. I practiced writing essays. I recorded myself speaking. I read complicated medical articles. On the day of the exam, I walked into the room shaking. But then I told myself, Sophia, you didn't come this far to quit now. I refused to fail. I knew I had worked hard for this moment, so I took a deep breath and gave it my best. A week later, I got my results. I passed. Holding that paper in my hands, tears streamed down my face. I did it. I actually did it. That was the moment I knew nothing could stop me. I was accepted into one of the best medical universities in Canada. But the real struggle was just beginning. Medical textbooks were in advanced English, professors spoke in complex medical terms, and I had to write perfect reports and give presentations. It was 10 times harder than anything I had faced before. But I remembered something. If I could learn English, I could do anything. So I didn't quit. I recorded my lectures and listened to them every night. I made flashcards for difficult medical terms. I joined study groups and practiced explaining medical concepts in English every single day. I pushed myself to the limit. And after years of hard work and sacrifice, I graduated as Dr. Sophia Williams. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I looked up at the sky and whispered, "This is for you, Mom and Dad." I made it. After graduation, I got my first job at a big hospital in Toronto. My first month's salary, $88,000. When I saw my bank account, I couldn't believe it. I remembered the days when I had only $5 left, struggling to choose between buying food or paying rent. Now, I could buy anything I wanted. But money wasn't the best part. The best part was saving lives. One day, a little girl was rushed into the hospital. Sick, scared, and crying. I held her hand and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll take care of you." Her mother looked at me, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you, doctor." At that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. I wasn't just an English learner anymore. I wasn't just a student. I was a doctor, and I had earned this. Now, listen to me carefully. I know many people say, "Accept yourself as you are." I disagree. You should never accept being weak. You should never accept being average. You must change yourself. Not for society, not for your friends, not for your family, for you. Because let me tell you something, nobody is coming to save you. Not your parents, not your teachers, not your boyfriend or girlfriend. Only you can change your life. When I was struggling, I could have made excuses. English is too hard. I don't have enough money. I'm not smart enough. But I didn't. Instead, I looked in the mirror and said, "Sophia, stop making excuses. It's time to work." And that's exactly what I did. If you're still here, it means you want more from life. So let me give you the real truth. Learn English like your life depends on it. Because it does. If you want a great career, you need English. Stop being lazy. Get up. Open a book. Watch English videos. Do the work. Put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Talk to strangers. Make mistakes. Embarrass yourself. That's how you grow. Today, I live in a beautiful apartment in downtown Toronto. I wake up every morning proud of myself. I drive my dream car. I travel the world. I help my parents financially. And most importantly, I love my life. But remember, I wasn't born lucky. I created this life. And you can too. Right now, you have two choices. One, keycap, close this page and do nothing. Stay the same. Keep making excuses. Keep dreaming, but never acting. To keycap, start working on yourself right now. Learn English every day. Improve yourself. Change your life. The choice is yours. If you choose the second option, then commit today. Because trust me, when you become the best version of yourself, it feels like the world is in your hands. Now go. Change your life.